Most people think that all AI works the same way, but predictive AI and generative AI solve very different business problems and they create value in very different ways. So, in this video, I'll explain how predictive AI and generative AI are fundamentally different. I'll explain how they work, I'll explain what types of business problems they can solve, and I'll explain when to use each one. Because once you understand the difference, you can start building an AI strategy that generates real value. Okay, let's start with predictive AI. Predictive AI is all about forecasting and decision support. It learns patterns from historical data in order to make predictions either about numbers or categories. So, really quickly, how it works, we use a type of classic AI called supervised learning to build predictive models. You give these systems a labeled data set, typically in a row and column format, sort of like an Excel spreadsheet, but in many cases, the data is stored in a database. You collect that data and you feed that data into the system to train it. And it's through that training that predictive AI learns to make good predictions. It improves its performance on that prediction task as it's exposed to new training examples. Now, in other videos, I've talked about the importance of data. I'm not going to go too far into the weeds on the exact data needs here, but I will say that data is extremely important for predictive AI. If you want to build a predictive system, you need the right data in the right format. Now, in terms of use cases, you can use predictive systems for all sorts of things. You can use it for forecasting. We sometimes use this to forecast sales or demand. You can use it to forecast things related to inventory if you're using AI or machine learning for operations. In marketing, there are some classic use cases. One of the most common is churn prediction, trying to predict when someone is going to stop being a customer. This is excellent for customer retention, which in turn helps increase or at least maintain revenue. There's also upsell propensity models for marketing. When you have multiple different service levels or tiers of a particular product, like a SaaS company that might have a basic level and a premium level, you can build a predictive AI system that will predict when someone is likely ready to upgrade. And if you can predict that, then you can have processes in place to reach out to those people, a new marketing campaign that gets sent to those people that are likely to upgrade, maybe sales calls that will be scheduled for those particular people, and so on. So, this is yet again another great use case for predictive systems that helps drive revenue. Furthermore, one thing that I'll add is we can use these types of predictive systems analytically or inferentially. So if you can predict some sort of behavior on the basis of an input, you can figure out which inputs, which input factors, or we would call them features, which input factors drive that prediction. So if you're trying to figure out who's going to churn, if you build the system in a certain way, you can actually figure out which customer details are most responsible for that churn behavior. This analytical knowledge can help you redefine and optimize and improve your internal business systems. So you can use predictive AI for decision support, decision automation, and also business and customer analytics. This helps you allocate your resources more efficiently and helps drive ROI. Next, let's talk about generative AI. Generative AI doesn't make predictions about the future, it generates outputs. Now, there are models that generate videos and images, but maybe the most common one right now is generative AI that generates text. We call these large language models, things like ChatGPT and Claude. These systems typically work with text based inputs and generate text based outputs. So, this can be for creative purposes and analytical purposes. I'll get to that in a second. Now, I don't want to get too into the weeds about how these systems are trained, but text based systems are typically trained with very large amounts of text. And it's actually so expensive that only a few companies can do this. Companies like OpenAI and Meta are training what we call foundation models. Now, I will say that you can take those foundation models off the shelf and you can often fine tune them or train them a little bit further on your own internal data to help improve those models on particular business tasks. We typically call that fine tuning. I don't want to focus too much on exactly how they're built because it's so complicated. They are, however, very useful for a variety of business use cases, but it's different than predictive AI. With generative AI, and specifically text based generative AI, you can use these systems to generate marketing creative and sales page copy. You can also use them for text based interaction systems, essentially chatbots. Although I think that chatbots really solve a somewhat narrow set of business problems. I think that they're often a little bit overused right now. You can use generative text systems for ideation and brainstorming, also question and answer. Most people on a day to day basis are using tools like ChatGPT just to get answers to their questions, trying to figure out how to solve a specific problem and getting some ideas. I will say these systems are often a little bit imperfect. They often give answers that are a little bit too textbook and often ignore or forget important context. So you need to be very careful if you're using a large language model for advice. Be extremely careful. These systems usually need a little bit of engineering to give them context. That brings us to a different use case, knowledge retrieval and summarization. You can often take a large language model and then give it access to databases and stores of documents. And those external data stores act like a sort of memory. Then an LLM is able, when it's asked questions or queried in some way, an LLM can go to those document stores or databases and gather that information and summarize it. We typically call these systems retrieval augmented generation systems, aka RAG. And these RAG systems are usually very good for interacting with your documents, retrieving important information, and then using that information for further processing. I'll add here, in comparison to predictive AI systems, generative AI is usually very bad at making predictions. Now, large language models are sort of a Swiss Army knife. So you can go to an LLM and ask it to try and make a prediction. You can even give it some data, let's say in a spreadsheet, and ask it to try and build a rough model, and it will try to do that. But these predictions and these systems that it builds are often very inadequate, and they're not as good as a true predictive AI system. So you need to be very careful if you're trying to use a large language model for making very precise predictions. It's probably not going to work very well, and you might not even realize it until it's too late. But they are good at generating business value in other ways. So they're very good at scaling up content generation, brainstorming, creativity, and just general day to day problem solving for low risk problems. I do not recommend using generative AI right now for problems where there's lots of potential risk. And I'll also add that you can use large language models inside of other AI systems like AI agents. And I do talk about that in other videos. So, when should you use predictive AI versus generative AI? Predictive AI, as the name implies, is best when you're trying to make very precise predictions, particularly when you're trying to predict a number like a sales forecast or a category such as churn versus not churn. And importantly, predictive AI typically uses data in a row and column format, more like something that's going to be in a spreadsheet or a database. On the other hand, you will use generative AI when you need to generate images or videos, or in the case of large language models, when you want to generate output text, as I suggested earlier for things like brainstorming, Q&A, text summarization, etc. So both predictive AI and generative AI can deliver serious business value, but only if you understand which to use at the right time. One type predicts, the other type creates. Having said that, there is a new type of AI emerging, AI agents, that neither predicts or generates, it acts. This is a form of AI that can make decisions, take initiative, and automate workflows. I cover AI agents in this next video.